The house was enveloped in the silence that always follows major events. The memorial table had been cleared away, the guests had left, and only the smell of wilted chrysanthemums reminded us that 3 days ago we had buried Edwin. I sat in his favorite chair by the fireplace, holding a cup of cold tea in my hands, and looked at the empty spaces where wreaths had stood not long ago. 72 years is a good age, people said at the wake. He lived a good life, others added. All these comforting words sounded right, but inside me there was only emptiness. 48 years of marriage, and now this house seemed too big, too quiet, too full of memories. Edwin was an engineer at a shipyard, a precise and judicious man. He never raised his voice or made a scene, but when something bothered him, I always sensed it. In recent months, something had been troubling him, especially when it came to Trevor, our only son, 45 years old, a successful manager at a construction company, father of 2 children. On paper, he was the perfect son to be proud of. But Edwin saw what I had been trying not to notice for years. Trevor only came to see us when he needed something: money for a new car, help with a down payment on a house, letters of recommendation for a job. And then he would disappear for months, not calling, not asking about our lives. I ran my hand over the armrest of the chair, feeling the familiar softness of the leather. Edwin loved to read here in the evenings, often falling asleep with a book in his hands. I would wake him gently, and we would go up to the bedroom together. Now the chair was empty, and it seemed sacrilegious to sit in it, but there were no other comfortable places in the living room. Twilight was falling outside the window. October days ended early in St. Petersburg, and the streetlights had already come on, illuminating the alley of old oak trees in front of our house. The neighbors had also turned on their lights, and the whole neighborhood looked cozy and peaceful. Edwin and I had lived here for more than 30 years and had seen the families in the neighboring houses change. The children grow up, and their parents grow old. Mrs. Clark from across the street had been widowed 5 years ago. She sold her mansion and moved into a smaller apartment. At the memorial service, she told me she didn't regret her decision, that the big house without her husband felt like a museum to her. Maybe she was right. Maybe clinging to the past is really unwise at my age. But this house is not just a place to live. It was here that Edwin proposed to me, kneeling in this very living room in front of the fireplace. It was here that we celebrated Trevor's birth, his graduation, his wedding. In the garden behind the house, Edwin planted roses in honor of each anniversary of our wedding. 48 rose bushes that reminded me every spring of how many years we had lived together. The sound of a car door slamming interrupted my thoughts. I looked out the window and saw Trevor's familiar silver SUV. He got out of the car, adjusted his tie, and headed for the porch. He was followed by Leslie, his wife, wearing an expensive black coat and high-heeled shoes. She always dressed as if she were going to a business meeting, even when she came to visit her mother-in-law. I watched them climb the porch steps. Trevor looked determined, the way he used to look as a child when he was about to ask for something important. Leslie walked beside him, her gait exuding the confidence of someone who knows what she wants. The doorbell rang melodiously. I didn't rush to get up, letting them wait a few seconds at the door. Let them stand in the cold for a moment. Think about how common courtesy requires a phone call first, especially when visiting a widow who has just buried her husband. When I opened the door, Trevor had already unbuttoned his coat and looked slightly annoyed. "Mom, we agreed we'd come at 6, he said, walking past me into the hall. "You could have opened the door right away." "We didn't agree," I replied calmly. "You said you'd come. That's not the same thing." "Hi, Doris." Leslie kissed me on the cheek, leaving a lipstick mark. "How are you? I hope you're holding up." We went into the living room, where Trevor was already looking around the room with an appraising gaze. He always did that when he came over, as if he were assessing what could be changed or sold. His gaze lingered on the antique clock on the mantelpiece, on the painting Edwin and I had bought during our honeymoon in Europe, on the silverware I had inherited from my mother. Leslie settled down on the sofa, elegantly crossing her legs. She looked around with the air of a designer assessing the scope of the work ahead. I noticed how her gaze slid over the wallpaper, the curtains, the arrangement of the furniture. None of it clearly matched her ideas about modern interior design. "Would you like some tea?" I asked, more out of habit than a desire to entertain. "No, Mom, we won't be long," Trevor said, sitting down in Edwin's chair without asking permission. "We need to talk to you about some important things." I sat down opposite them, folding my hands in my lap. In recent years, I had learned to remain silent when Trevor began his serious conversations. Usually, they were about what I should do or how I should live my life. First, it was advice about health, then finances, then how I should spend my time. "You see," he began, leaning back in his chair and clasping his fingers. "Now that Dad is gone, we need to think about your future. This house is too big for one person. It's expensive to maintain. And at your age—" "At my age, what?" I interrupted him. "Well, you're 73, Mom. You have to be realistic. It's not reasonable to live alone in a house like this. What if you get sick? Who will help you? The nearest neighbors are a 5-minute walk away, and we live an hour's drive away. Besides, the heating system here is archaic, the plumbing is old, and the roof needs repair." Leslie agreed with her husband, occasionally glancing meaningfully at the furniture and paintings on the walls. I noticed how she looked appraisingly at Edwina's grandmother's antique chest of drawers and the Persian rug we bought in our first year of marriage. "Besides," Leslie continued in a soft but insistent tone, "maintaining a house like this requires constant attention. A gardener, a cleaning lady, repairs. It's expensive and troublesome, and property taxes are going up every year." "Leslie and I think you should consider your options," Trevor continued. "There are some very good homes for the elderly, modern with medical care and entertainment programs. You'll find friends there. You won't be alone." "A nursing home," I said flatly. "Not a nursing home," Trevor protested. "A residence for active seniors. It's a completely different thing. People there play bridge, do yoga, go on excursions. Everyone has their own apartment, but there are also common areas, a dining room, a library, and most importantly, there is round-the-clock medical care." Leslie leaned forward, feigning sympathy. "Doris, I understand how hard it is for you to leave your home, but face it, there are so many memories of Edwin here. It only intensifies your pain. A change of scenery will do you good. You can start a new life, find new interests." I listened to them and thought about how easily they were controlling my life, as if I were no longer capable of making my own decisions, as if my age automatically made me incompetent, as if 48 years of marriage and housekeeping had taught me nothing. "What will happen to the house?" I asked. Trevor and Leslie exchanged glances. There was so much understanding in that look that it became clear they had already discussed everything between themselves, probably more than once or twice. "Well, of course it will have to be sold," Trevor said, trying to sound casual. "The money will go toward paying for your stay at the residence. Plus, there will be a nice sum left over for a rainy day. You know that good places don't come cheap, but our house is valued quite highly." "Our house?" "Well, I mean, the family home," Trevor hastily corrected himself. "Of course, it's formally registered to Dad, but now, anyway, as the heir, I'm ready to take care of all the hassle of selling it." "I see. Mom, you do understand that we care about you, right?" There was a barely perceptible note of irritation in Trevor's voice, as if my calmness annoyed him. "We can't constantly worry that something will happen to you, and we won't even know about it. We have our own lives, jobs, Children. Carlton is getting ready for college, and Brianna needs help with music school. Leslie nodded in agreement with her husband. We're ready to take care of everything, she added. We'll find a good place, help you move, and take care of selling the house. You won't have to worry about a thing. Just focus on your health and peace of mind. How convenient for them, I thought. Taking care of all the hassle of selling a house worth several $1 million. A house in the historic district of St. Petersburg, overlooking the bay, with a garden that Edwin had been planting for 20 years. Of course, they're willing to take on that hassle, especially when it comes to the realtor's commission and what will be left after paying for my stay at the residence. I need time to think, I said. Of course, Mom. Trevor stood up, signaling that the conversation was over. But don't drag it out. The sooner you make a decision, the easier it will be to arrange everything. Besides, the real estate market is good right now, so don't miss your chance. Leslie also got up, adjusting her coat. We've already looked at a few places, she said. Very decent establishments. We can go see them next week if you want. They were about to leave, and I walked them to the door. In the hallway, Trevor stopped by the mirror and adjusted his tie and hair. Leslie checked her lipstick and looked herself over from head to toe. They looked like a couple who had just successfully concluded a business deal. Leslie kissed me on the cheek again, and Trevor patted me on the shoulder. We'll be back soon, he said, and we'll try to find some suitable places to look at. The main thing is not to worry too much. Everything will be fine. When the door closed behind them, I went back to the living room and sat down in Edwin's chair. The house was quiet again, but now it was a different kind of quiet, tense, full of unspoken words. I closed my eyes and tried to imagine myself in one of the residences Trevor had mentioned. A small room, communal breakfasts, mandatory social events, and no one who really knew me. The last embers were smoldering in the fireplace. Soon it would be time to add more wood, but I didn't want to get up. I didn't want to break the silence in which I could think about what had happened and what would happen next. After Trevor and Leslie left, I sat in the living room for a long time, staring at the dying embers in the fireplace. Their words still rang in my ears, but my thoughts carried me back to the past, to those conversations with Edwin that had taken place in the last months of his life. Back then, he often stayed late in his office, and when I went in to ask if he wanted tea, I would find him sitting at his desk with a pensive expression on his face. Edwin's first serious attack happened in February. We were watching the evening news when he suddenly clutched his chest and turned pale. The ambulance arrived quickly. The doctors did everything they could, but the diagnosis sounded like a death sentence. Ischemic heart disease, the need for constant medication, restrictions on physical activity. At 67, Edwin was suddenly confronted with his own mortality. He took the news calmly, as he had taken all the important events in his life. He began to take his pills carefully, changed his diet, and began to rest more. But I saw how this illness changed his attitude toward many things. He began to talk about the past more often, looking through old photographs and reviewing his papers and documents. Trevor came to visit his father only 2 weeks after the attack, and that was because I called him myself. He stayed at the house for less than an hour, spending most of the time on the phone with work, and when he hung up, he immediately started getting ready to go home. I have an important meeting with investors tomorrow, he explained, pulling on his coat. Dad is getting better, that's the main thing. If anything happens, call me right away. Edwin looked at his son silently, not trying to stop him. Only when the door closed behind Trevor did he say quietly, "He didn't even ask if I needed help." After that visit, Edwin began to spend even more time in his office. He sorted through documents, called the bank, and met with his lawyer. At first, I thought he was just putting his affairs in order, which is natural for someone in his position. But gradually, I began to notice that he was worried about something. One evening in late March, I brought him tea to his office and saw that he was holding a photo of little Trevor. In the picture, our son was about 5 years old, sitting on Edwin's lap and laughing. They both looked happy. Do you remember how happy he was when I came home from work? Edwin asked, without taking his eyes off the photo. He would run to me, hug my legs, and ask me to play with him. I remember, I replied, putting the cup on the table. You read him bedtime stories and built houses with him out of building blocks. When did everything change? Edwin put the photo on the table and looked at me. When did he become so indifferent? I sat down in a chair next to his desk. This question had been tormenting me for many years, but I had never dared to discuss it with my husband. I thought that if we didn't talk about it out loud, the problem would somehow resolve itself. I think it started in high school, I said slowly, when he went to college and started coming home less often, and then work, marriage, children. He has his own life. Everyone has their own life, Doris, but that doesn't mean you should forget about your parents. Edwin stood up and walked over to the window. Through the glass, he could see the garden where he had spent so much time tending to the roses and planting new plantings. Spring was just beginning, and most of the plants were still dormant under a layer of last year's leaves. When I was in the hospital after my stroke, he said, without turning to me, I thought about what would happen to you if I wasn't around, and I realized that Trevor wouldn't take care of you. He'll take what he wants and forget you exist. Edwin, don't say that. He's our son. That's exactly why I'm saying it. He turned to me, and I saw determination in his eyes. I saw how he looked at the house during his last visit. He already has everything planned out in his head. I wanted to argue, but the words stuck in my throat because I had noticed Trevor's glances too, that appraising way he looked at our things, as if he were estimating their value. What do you want to do? I asked. I want to change the will, Edwin replied simply. Everything should go to you. The house, the accounts, the investments, everything. But Trevor? Trevor will get his inheritance after you die. If, of course, you see fit to leave him anything, that will be your decision. We talked about it for several more evenings. Edwin explained his reasoning to me calmly and in detail. He didn't want me to be dependent on my son, didn't want Trevor to be able to force me into any decisions by threatening to withdraw his support. I have life insurance, he said, plus retirement savings and investment accounts, a total of about $13 million. That's enough for you to live comfortably for the rest of your life. Hire help if you need it. Travel if you want to. $13 million. The amount seemed unreal. We never lived richly, though we never wanted for anything. Edwin was a cautious investor, saving money and buying shares in reliable companies. But I had no idea that over the years, these savings had grown to such an amount. What if Trevor wants to contest the will? I asked. Let him try. The document has been drawn up according to all the rules. There are witnesses, and I undergo regular medical examinations that confirm my legal capacity. Besides, I'm leaving him a symbolic amount, $10,000. That's enough to show that I haven't forgotten him. Edwin met with the lawyer twice. The first time was to discuss the details. The second was to sign the documents. I was with him both times, acting as one of the witnesses. The lawyer, Mr. Baxter, had been working with our family for many years and understood the situation perfectly. Many parents face similar problems, he told us after signing the will. Children take their parents for granted and don't think about their needs and feelings. You are doing the right thing, Mr. Harrington. The new will was placed in a bank safe deposit box, with one copy remaining with the lawyer and another in Edwin's home safe. We decided not to tell anyone about the changes. It was our secret, our protection against an uncertain future. Just promise me, Edwin said one of the last evenings when we were sitting in the living room and he was already having trouble climbing the stairs. Promise me you won't let him push you around. You're a strong woman, Doris, stronger than you think. I promise, I replied, although at the time I didn't fully understand how important those words would turn out to be. Edwin spent most of his last weeks in bed. The doctor came every day, and a nurse was on duty in the house around the clock. Trevor visited his father regularly, but these visits seemed more like a duty than an expression of filial love. He sat by the bed, talked about work and the children, but there seemed to be an invisible wall between him and his father. Edwin died peacefully in his sleep one night in September. I woke up when I stopped hearing him breathe. The nurse confirmed what I already knew. My husband, my companion for 48 years, was no longer with me. Trevor came as soon as I called him. He was efficient and organized, took care of all the funeral arrangements, and contacted relatives and friends. During those days, he showed his best side, and for a short time, I thought I had been wrong about him, that grief had awakened the best feelings in him. But at the wake, I noticed how attentively he was looking around the house, counting the number of guests and estimating the costs. And when the last guest left, he sat down in my father's chair and said, "Well, Mom, now we need to discuss practical matters." I asked him to wait a few days, saying that I wasn't ready for such conversations yet. He agreed, but I could see the impatience in his eyes. He had already made plans and decided everything for me. Today's visit was just a formality, an attempt to get my consent to what he considered the only reasonable decision. But Trevor didn't know about the will. He didn't know that his father had anticipated this turn of events and taken measures to protect me. He didn't know that I, not he, was the heir to all the property. I got up from my chair and walked over to the home safe hidden behind a painting in Edwin's study. Opening it, I took out a copy of the will and reread the document. Clear, unambiguous wording. All accounts and property pass to me. Trevor gets $10,000 and nothing else. Tomorrow he'll probably come again with brochures about retirement homes. He'll try to convince me of the wisdom of his plan. He'll talk about my safety and his concern for me, and then I'll show him this will. The week passed in a strange state of limbo. The house seemed both too quiet and too full of people who kept showing up unannounced. Trevor got into the habit of dropping by every day, sometimes alone, sometimes with Leslie, as if to check that everything was going according to his plan. On Monday, he came with a folder full of brochures advertising various retirement homes. He laid them out on the dining room table like a salesman showing his wares to a potential buyer. Bright photos of smiling elderly people playing tennis, in the library, in the dining room with snow-white tablecloths. "Look, Mom, this place is 20 minutes from here," he said, pointing to pictures of an elegant colonial-style building. "It's a very prestigious area with excellent reviews. They have a swimming pool, a tennis court, even their own greenhouse." I flipped through the pages, looking at photos of rooms that looked like rooms in an expensive hotel. Everything was thought out to the smallest detail, sterile and completely impersonal. Not a single family photo, not a single thing that would suggest that a real person with a real history lived here. "And this option is even better," Trevor continued, opening the next brochure. "They offer different levels of care. At first, you live independently, but if you need help, you can move to a ward with medical care." "A ward with medical care," I repeated. "You mean a hospital room?" "Not a ward, but a specially equipped apartment," Trevor corrected with slight irritation. "Mom, you're too negative about everything. This is a modern approach to caring for the elderly." He spent over an hour with me, explaining the advantages of each facility, calculating the cost of living, and comparing conditions. I listened to him, asking questions from time to time, but mostly I remained silent. There was something unpleasant about his enthusiasm, as if he were discussing a lucrative deal rather than my future place of residence. On Tuesday, Trevor arrived with someone else, a middle-aged man in a suit carrying a briefcase, got out of the car with him. They chatted animatedly as they climbed the steps to the porch. Mom, meet Dave Simmons, the real estate agent. Trevor introduced his companion. I asked him to appraise the house so we would have an idea of how much we're working with. Mr. Simmons turned out to be a pleasant but businesslike man. He walked through the rooms, took notes in his notebook, photographed the interiors, and measured the square footage. Trevor accompanied him, commenting on the merits of the house and plans for its improvement. Of course, it will need some cosmetic repairs, he said, standing in the living room. The wallpaper is outdated, the floors need to be sanded, and the kitchen needs to be completely redone. But the structure is good, and the layout is excellent. The house is in excellent condition, agreed the realtor. The area is very sought after. I think with the right presentation, we can get a good price. I sat in my chair and watched as a stranger assessed my house, my furniture, my life. Trevor acted like he owned the place, explaining the history of the house and talking about the recent improvements Edwin had made. It was as if I were invisible, as if my opinion didn't matter. Mrs. Harrington, Mr. Simmons addressed me when the inspection was over. This is a truly beautiful house. I'm sure there will be many people interested in buying it. Thank you, I replied dryly. On Wednesday, Trevor arrived with Leslie, and they spent several hours in the house discussing renovation plans. Leslie walked from room to room with a tape measure and a notebook, like a designer who had been given a new project. This wallpaper is awful, she commented, looking at the walls in the dining room. And the color is so dull. You need light colors here, something fresh and modern. Edwin and I chose this wallpaper when we renovated 10 years ago, I remarked. That's exactly why it's outdated, Leslie replied, without looking up from her notes. Design changes so quickly. What was fashionable 10 years ago now looks old-fashioned. She critically examined the furniture that Edwin and I had collected over the years. The antique dining table where we celebrated all our holidays, the sideboard with the family porcelain, the armchairs where we spent quiet evenings reading. This furniture will have to go, of course, Leslie said to Trevor as if I weren't in the room. It's too massive for a modern interior. We need something lighter, more airy. Where will we put it? Trevor asked. We can sell it through an antique dealer, or donate it to charity if it's not particularly valuable. They discussed the fate of my belongings as if I had already moved into one of those residences whose brochures Trevor had so insistently shown me, as if my consent was just a formality that would be obtained sooner or later. On Thursday, Trevor arrived alone, but he was even more brash than usual. He walked straight into Edwin's office without asking permission and started rummaging through the documents. I need to find all the papers related to the house, he explained when I went in to see what he was doing. The property deeds, insurance policies, utility bills. I'll need all of that to sell it. Trevor, I haven't agreed to sell it yet. Mom, don't be so stubborn, he said without looking up from the papers. We've discussed everything. It's the only sensible decision. He shuffled the documents, sorting them into piles as if he were already the rightful owner. At one point, he stumbled upon a locked desk drawer and tried to open it. Where's the key to this drawer? He asked. I don't know, I lied. The key was in my jewelry box, but I wasn't going to tell him that. Trevor frowned and tried to pick the lock with whatever he had on hand, but the drawer was made of sturdy wood and the lock was secure. He finally gave up, but I could see that it annoyed him. On Friday, he came back with the realtor, this time for a more detailed inspection. Mr. Simmons brought a photographer with him, and they did a real photo shoot of the house. They photographed every room from different angles, took pictures of the facade, the garden, and the view from the windows. It's for the ad, Trevor explained. The better the photos, the more buyers will be interested. I watched as strangers photographed my house for sale, and I felt anger rising within me. But I kept quiet, continued to play the role of a submissive elderly woman who agrees with the decisions of her younger and more energetic relatives. On Saturday, Leslie arrived with her friend, an interior designer named Cindy. They spent almost the entire day in the house discussing plans for remodeling and new designs. "This wall definitely needs to be knocked down," Cindy said, pointing to the partition between the kitchen and the dining room. "Open floor plans are very popular right now. And you could put a walk-in closet here," Leslie added, standing in the bedroom where Edwin and I had lived for more than 30 years. "Modern buyers really appreciate large walk-in closets." They talked about my house as if it were an empty space that needed to be remodeled for new occupants. They didn't consider the history of these rooms, the memories associated with every corner. For them, it was just real estate, an investment property. On Sunday, Trevor called someone on the phone and talked at length about renovation plans. I overheard the conversation as I walked past the living room where he was sitting with his cell phone. "Yes, the house is great, but it needs some updating," he said. "No, it doesn't need serious repairs, just cosmetic work. 5 or 6 weeks and it will be like new. Of course, we need to set aside a decent budget, but we can sell it for more. Yes, my mother has agreed to move. We're just finalizing the details." The last sentence particularly bothered me. My mother agreed to move. He is already telling strangers about my consent, which I never gave. He is making plans based on his assumptions, without considering my opinion. When the conversation ended, Trevor approached me with a satisfied look. "That was the contractor," he explained. "He's a very good specialist. He did some renovations for my friends. He can start work as early as next month." "Trevor," I said slowly, "I didn't agree to the renovations." "Mom, why are you resisting?" He looked annoyed. "The house has to be sold anyway, and to get a good price, it needs to be fixed up. It's basic logic." He spoke to me as if I were a child who needed to be taught a simple truth. There was a patronizing condescension in his tone that hurt more than outright rudeness. All week long, I watched Trevor and Leslie dictate my life, plan my future, discuss the sale of my house. They acted with the confidence of people who know they have the right to do so, and I let them think that, waiting for the right moment to expose them. That moment was fast approaching. Monday began with rain. Gray clouds hung over St. Petersburg, and raindrops tapped endlessly on the windows, creating a melancholy melody. I sat in the kitchen with a cup of coffee, watching the water run down the glass, thinking that this day would be a turning point. All last week, I had silently endured Trevor and Leslie's intrusion into my life, but now my patience had come to an end. Around noon, the familiar sound of a car door slamming announced my son's arrival. I looked out the window and saw that this time, Trevor had not come alone. Leslie and another man, whom I had never seen before, got out of the car with him. The stranger was dressed in a strict business suit and carried a leather briefcase. All three of them looked like people who had come on important business. The doorbell rang more sharply than usual, as if Trevor had deliberately pressed the button longer than necessary. When I opened the door, he was already standing there with the keys in his hand, ready to enter on his own. "Mom, we need to talk," he said, without bothering to say hello. "This is Mr. Parker from the real estate company. We have some very good news." Mr. Parker turned out to be a middle-aged man with neatly trimmed gray hair and a professional smile. He shook my hand and introduced himself in a polite but businesslike tone. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Harrington. I'm very impressed with your house. It's truly a gem in this neighborhood." We went into the living room, where Mr. Parker sat down on the sofa and opened his briefcase. Leslie sat down next to him, while Trevor paced around the room, looking like a man who could barely contain his excitement. Doris, we have some amazing news, Leslie began, without waiting for me to sit down. Mr. Parker has already found a buyer for the house. More accurately, a potential buyer, the realtor corrected, taking a folder of documents out of his briefcase. Very serious people, ready to consider the purchase without lengthy negotiations. Trevor stopped by the fireplace and turned to me with a triumphant expression on his face. Can you imagine, Mom? They're offering $3,800,000. That's a great price for the current market. Mr. Parker says it's a very fair offer. More than fair, confirmed the realtor. In today's market, getting that kind of money for a house that needs cosmetic repairs is very lucky. I slowly sank into my chair, studying the faces of these people. All three were beaming with satisfaction, as if they had just made a lucrative deal. Mr. Parker laid out several documents on the coffee table, explaining the details of the proposed transaction. The buyers are ready to put down a deposit of $100,000 this week, he continued. The only condition is that they want to move in before Christmas. They need time to renovate before moving in. Before Christmas? I asked. That's only 2 months. 2 months is more than enough, Trevor interjected. We've already found you a great place in the residence. They can take you in at the beginning of December. Everything fits together perfectly. Leslie nodded in agreement with her husband. We went there last week without you, she said with the look of someone who had done a good deed. It's a very nice place. You'll like it there. They even have a room with a view of the lake. You went without me? My voice betrayed my surprise. Well, yes, Trevor shrugged. Why bother you at the preliminary selection stage? We immediately eliminated the unsuitable options and chose the best one. Mr. Parker waited patiently for the family discussion to end. From time to time, he glanced at his watch, making it clear that he had a busy schedule and other important meetings. So, Mrs. Harrington, he said to me when the conversation died down, what do you say to the offer? I can assure you that opportunities like this are rare. I looked at the documents laid out on the table in front of them. A preliminary sales contract, technical specifications for the house, financial calculations. Everything had been prepared in advance. All that remained was to sign in the right place. What if I don't want to sell the house? I asked quietly. Silence fell. Mr. Parker raised his eyebrows. Leslie opened her mouth in surprise, and Trevor froze as if he didn't understand what he had heard. Mom, what are you talking about? Trevor's voice sounded tense. We discussed everything. You yourself agreed that it's unreasonable to live alone in such a big house. I didn't give my final consent to the sale. But you looked at the brochures for the residences. We discussed the financial issues. Trevor was beginning to lose his composure. I listened to your suggestions. That doesn't mean I agreed with them. Mr. Parker cleared his throat awkwardly and began gathering the documents back into his briefcase. Perhaps I should leave you to discuss this as a family, he suggested diplomatically. No, stay, I said, rising from my chair. I think it would be useful for you to know who the real owner of this house is. I headed for Edwin's office, sensing a rapid whispering conversation unfolding behind me. Trevor was explaining something to the realtor, and Leslie was adding her comments. The words age, stress, and temporary confusion drifted from the living room. I opened the safe, took out the will, and returned to the people waiting for me. All three looked at me with an expression of mixed concern and irritation. Trevor, I said, handing him the document, I think you should read this. He took the will with a puzzled look, scanned the first few lines, and his face began to change. First incomprehension, then amazement, then anger. What is this? His voice sounded hoarse. Your father's will, the last will and testament of Edwin Harrington, drawn up in the presence of witnesses and notarized. Trevor reread the document over and over, as if hoping the words on the page would change. Leslie peered over his shoulder, her face gradually turning pale. "This can't be," she whispered. "Edwin couldn't. He always said Trevor would get the house. When was this drawn up?" Trevor asked, his voice sounding hollow. "In March of this year, a month after your father's first heart attack." "But why? Why didn't he tell me?" "Perhaps because he saw how you behaved toward me, how you planned my life without asking my opinion." Mr. Parker sat, hesitant to intervene in the family drama, but clearly understanding that the deal had fallen through. He carefully put the documents away in his briefcase, preparing for a quick retreat. Trevor stood up and began pacing the room, waving the will. "This is illegal," he exclaimed. "Dad was sick. He was on medication. He couldn't assess the situation soberly." "Your father underwent regular medical examinations that confirmed his legal capacity," I replied calmly. "Besides, there are witnesses to the drafting of the will." "Who are the witnesses?" "Attorney Mr. Baxter, his secretary Mrs. Coleman, and me." "You?" Trevor stopped and stared at me. "You knew about this the whole time?" "Yes, I did." "And you kept quiet. You let me make plans, waste time, negotiate with people. You made plans without asking my consent. You controlled my life as if I were already incapacitated." Leslie finally found her voice. "But Doris, you understand that this is wrong, don't you? Trevor is the only son. The inheritance should pass to the children. That's the natural order of things." "The natural order of things is when children take care of their parents, not plan how to get rid of them," I replied. Mr. Parker decided it was time to intervene. "Excuse me, but if the will is genuine, then Mrs. Harrington is indeed the sole owner of the property. No transaction is possible without her consent." Trevor turned to him with a furious look. "What if the will is fake? What if it can be challenged in court?" "That's possible," the realtor replied cautiously, "but it will require a lengthy legal process and significant expenses. Besides, if the document is drawn up correctly—" "It is drawn up correctly," I interrupted. "Mr. Baxter has been working with our family for 20 years. He knows his business." Trevor threw the will on the coffee table and stared out the window. His shoulders tensed, his hands clenched into fists. Leslie approached him and put her hand on his shoulder, but he pulled away. "How much?" he asked without turning around. "How much of what?" "How much did Dad leave you? Just the house or something else?" I hesitated for a second, but then decided to tell the truth. The house and everything else. Bank accounts, investments, insurance. About $13 million in total. There was a dead silence. Mr. Parker dropped his pen. Leslie opened her mouth but didn't make a sound. Trevor slowly turned to me, and in his eyes I saw something I had never seen before. Not just anger or disappointment, real hatred. "13 million," he repeated quietly. "And how much did I get?" $10,000. 10,000. He laughed, but the laughter was scarier than a scream. "My father left me $10,000 out of a $13 million inheritance." "Trevor, shut up!" He turned to me, his face contorted with rage. "You poisoned his mind. You turned him against his own son." "I didn't say anything to your father that he didn't already see for himself." "Lies. You've always been cunning, always known how to make me look bad. And now you're taking advantage of his illness to get everything." Leslie tried to calm him down, but Trevor was beside himself with rage. He grabbed one of the framed photos from the table, a picture of our family taken at his graduation, and threw it forcefully onto the floor. The glass shattered into pieces. "For 30 years, I was the perfect son. I visited you, helped you when you needed it. And for what? For never taking an interest in our lives. You only came when you needed something. That's not true. Trevor, when was the last time you called your father just to talk? When did you ask about my health? When did you come to spend time with the family, not just to ask for help? He opened his mouth to answer, but no words came out. Because we both knew the truth. We knew that for the past 10 years, his visits had always been connected with some kind of request or obligation. Mr. Parker got up from the sofa, finally gathering his things. I think I'd better go, he said. Contact me if the situation changes. No one answered him. Leslie walked the realtor to the door, then returned to the living room, where Trevor continued to stand in the middle of the room, clenching and unclenching his fists. We're not going to leave it at that, he said finally. We'll go to the lawyers. We'll find a way to contest this will. That's your right, I replied calmly. You'll regret it, Mom. You'll regret it very much. With that, he headed for the door, Leslie following silently behind him. A few minutes later, the house was silent again, but now it was a different kind of silence, not peaceful, but tense. I knew this was only the beginning. Trevor would not accept this turn of events, but now I was ready to fight. 2 days passed in deceptive calm. I cleaned up the pieces of the broken photograph, put the furniture back in place that had been moved during the realtor's visits, and tried to restore the house to its usual cozy atmosphere. But the silence was tense, like before a storm. I knew that Trevor had not accepted what he had learned and was preparing for a new offensive. He showed up on Wednesday morning, and one look at his face was enough to understand that over the past 2 days, he had not just been dealing with disappointment, but making plans. Leslie and an elderly man in an expensive suit who introduced himself as Jonathan Reed, a lawyer, arrived with him. All three looked like people ready for a serious conversation. Mom, we need to discuss everything again, Trevor said, walking into the living room without invitation. And this time, honestly. Mr. Reed turned out to be an experienced and cautious man. He politely introduced himself, explained that he had been working with Trevor's family for several years, and asked permission to ask me a few questions. His manner of behavior reflected years of experience dealing with sensitive family matters. Mrs. Harrington, he began, settling into the chair opposite me. Your son has asked me to look into the situation with the will. May I ask you to tell me exactly how this document was drawn up? I explained in detail the circumstances surrounding the drafting of the will. I told him about Edwin's illness, his concerns about the family's future, and his meetings with Mr. Baxter. The lawyer listened attentively, asking clarifying questions from time to time. So, your husband was the one who initiated the changes to the will? He clarified. Absolutely. In fact, at first I tried to talk him out of it. Why? It seemed too cruel to deprive our son of his inheritance, but Edwin explained his reasoning to me, and I realized he was right. Trevor, who had been silent until then, couldn't hold back any longer. What reasoning? He exploded. What logic is there in leaving your son $10,000 out of $13 million? The logic of someone who has seen how you treat your parents, I replied calmly. How do I treat them? I've always been an attentive son. I helped you when you asked. Trevor, you only helped when it was convenient for you, or when it didn't require any serious effort on your part. Leslie intervened, trying to sound conciliatory. Doris, I understand that you're under a lot of stress after Edwin's death. Perhaps some things don't seem to you the way they really are. Trevor always cared about both of you. Cared? I looked at her in surprise. Leslie, do you remember how many times you visited us over the past 5 years? Without any reason, just to spend time with the family? Leslie opened her mouth to respond, but then closed it. She was clearly trying to remember such occasions, but there weren't any. Do you remember, I continued, how Trevor reacted when Edwin had his first heart attack? He came 2 weeks later, 2 weeks, Leslie, and when he did come, he spent less than an hour with his father. He had important work, Leslie objected weakly. Everyone has important work, but when a parent is hospitalized with a heart attack, children usually find the time. Mr. Reed listened patiently to this family squabble, taking notes in his notebook. From time to time, he glanced at Trevor, and it seemed to me that the lawyer was beginning to understand what Edwin had been talking about when he decided to change his will. "Mrs. Harrington," he said to me when the argument subsided, "may I ask if you and your husband discussed the specific reasons for his decision?" "We did. Edwin was afraid that after his death, Trevor would force me to sell the house and move into a nursing home. He didn't want me to be dependent on my son." "That's ridiculous," Trevor exclaimed. "We offered you an excellent place to live." "You didn't. You presented me with a fait accompli. There's a significant difference. Mom, you understand that it's not wise to live alone at your age. At my age, it's not wise to let other people make decisions for me." Mr. Reed raised his hand, calling for silence. "Let me ask you a direct question," he said. "Mrs. Harrington, do you believe your husband was of sound mind when he made his will?" "Absolutely. Edwin was physically ill, but mentally he remained sharp until his last days. He read, did crossword puzzles, and discussed political news. The decision to change the will was a deliberate and considered one." "And were there any attempts at coercion on your part?" "None whatsoever. On the contrary, I tried to dissuade him, suggesting that he at least leave the house to Trevor." Trevor jumped up and began pacing the room. "It's all a lie," he exclaimed. "She manipulated Dad, took advantage of his illness. She told him nasty things about me." "Trevor," I said firmly, "I never said anything bad about you to your father. I didn't need to. He saw it for himself." "What did he see? What did I do?" "Do you want me to list them?" I stood up from my chair and looked him in the eye. "Fine. When your father turned 65, you forgot to wish him a happy birthday. You only remembered a week later and sent him a generic card. I was busy. When he was diagnosed with diabetes 3 years ago, you never once asked how he was feeling or what medication he was taking. I'm not a doctor. When we decided to repair the roof of the house, you said it was a waste of money at our age. But when you needed collateral for a new car, you came over that same day." Trevor stopped and stared at me. "That's not—" "Let me finish," I interrupted him. "When your father was in the hospital after his first attack, you spent most of your visit on the phone with work. And when he asked you to stay longer, you said you had an important meeting." "I did have an important meeting." "More important than your father in intensive care?" The room fell silent. Even Leslie couldn't find anything to say in her husband's defense. Mr. Reed continued to take notes, his face impassive, but I could see that he understood everything. "Mom," Trevor said more quietly, "I know I wasn't the perfect son, but I'm not a monster. I worked, built a career, provided for my family." "No one is saying you're a monster," I replied, "but you are selfish, and your father saw that. But to disinherit his son because of that, that's excessive. Edwin didn't disinherit you. He postponed it. Everything that remains after my death may go to you, if, of course, you change your attitude toward me." Leslie leaned forward, her eyes lighting up with hope. "So you can change the will in our favor?" "I can, but I don't see any reason to do so yet." Trevor began pacing the room again, but now his movements were more erratic. I could see the struggle between anger and calculation in his mind. "All right," he said finally. "Let's say you're right. Let's say I wasn't the best son. But now I'm ready to change. We can start all over again. Trevor, 2 weeks ago you were planning to send me to a nursing home and sell my house without my consent. What has changed in these 2 weeks, other than you finding out about the will? He opened his mouth to answer, but the words wouldn't come, because we both knew the answer to that question. Mr. Reed closed his notebook and looked at Trevor. I have to be honest with you, he said. After talking to your mother, I have no reason to believe the will is invalid. The document is correctly drafted, there are witnesses, and the testator's motives are clear and reasonable. But there must be some way. Theoretically, you could try to contest the will in court, but it would be expensive, time-consuming, and with minimal chances of success, especially considering what I heard today. Leslie grabbed her husband's arm. Trevor, maybe we should try to talk to Mom? Show her that we've really changed? But Trevor looked at me with an expression that showed more than just disappointment. There was something cold and calculating in his eyes. All right, Mom, he said slowly. You won this round, but the game isn't over yet. With that, he headed for the door. Leslie hurried after him, while Mr. Reed lingered for a few seconds. Mrs. Harrington, he said quietly, let me give you some advice. Be careful. When it comes to such large sums of money, people are capable of many things. After they left, I sat in the living room for a long time, thinking about what had happened. Trevor hadn't given up. What's more, he now knew that threats and emotional pressure wouldn't work. And that meant he would try to find other ways to get what he wanted. After the lawyer's visit, there was a week of relative calm. Trevor didn't show up or call, and this silence alarmed me more than his rage. I knew my son well enough to understand that he wasn't the type to give up after the first setback, especially when $13 million were at stake. October was coming to an end, and the leaves on the trees in front of the house were turning golden and crimson. Edwin always loved this time of year, saying that autumn brought a special beauty to our neighborhood. We often walked along the alleys, collecting leaves to dry, planning next year's garden work. Now I walked alone, and these walks filled me with both sadness and gratitude for the years we had spent together. On Saturday morning, I was working in the garden, picking the last wilted roses, when I heard the familiar sound of a car. This time, Trevor didn't come alone. His whole family got out of the car. Trevor himself, Leslie, and their 2 children, 17-year-old Carlton and 15-year-old Brianna. I hadn't seen them all together in a long time, and for a moment my heart fluttered with joy. Perhaps we would finally have a normal family visit, but after a few minutes, it became clear that this was no accident. Trevor and Leslie's behavior suggested a premeditated strategy, and the children looked as if they had been brought here against their will. Hi, Grandma, Brianna said, hugging me reluctantly. There was no warmth in her voice, just formal politeness. Carlton limited himself to a nod and immediately took out his phone, showing that he would rather be anywhere else but here. We decided it had been a long time since we'd all been together as a family, Trevor explained, but I detected a false note in his tone. The kids missed their grandmother. We went into the house where Leslie immediately busied herself in the kitchen, offering to make tea for everyone. Brianna settled down on the sofa, examining her nails, while Carlton continued to stare at his phone screen. How's school? I asked my granddaughter, trying to strike up a conversation. Fine, she replied monosyllabically, without looking up. What about you, Carlton? How's your college prep going? Fine, he muttered, still glued to his phone. Trevor sat in the chair opposite and watched the scene with the air of a director, giving the actors time to get into character. Leslie brought tea and cookies, set everything out on the coffee table, and sat down next to the children. Children, she said softly, tell Grandma about your plans for the future. Brianna reluctantly looked up. I want to study music. I want to go to conservatory. That's wonderful, I exclaimed. Which instrument do you like best? The violin. But lessons are very expensive, and you need a good violin, and they cost a lot of money. I looked at Trevor, who nodded with a serious expression. Yes, music education is not cheap these days, he agreed. But we are willing to invest in our children's future, no matter what. And I want to study engineering, added Carlton, finally putting down his phone. I want to go to MIT, but it's very expensive. Over 40,000 a year, Trevor chimed in, plus room and board, textbooks, a total of about 60,000 annually. I was beginning to understand where this conversation was going. Trevor was using the children as emotional weapons, hoping that their grandmother's feelings would prove stronger than common sense. Of course, we'll find a way to pay for the children's education, he continued, looking me in the eye. We'll take out loans, sell some of our property. The main thing is that the children don't suffer because of family disagreements. Leslie put her hand on Brianna's shoulder. It's so hard for children to understand why a family is fighting, she said sadly. They're used to us being a close-knit family where everyone supports each other. So now we're not a close-knit family? I asked. I don't know, Trevor replied. It depends on what's more important to you, revenge or family happiness. Revenge? I felt anger boiling up inside me. Do you think carrying out your father's will is revenge? Dad was sick when he made his will. He couldn't assess the situation soberly. Edwin was perfectly sane, and you know it. Brianna looked at her father, then at me. Grandma, she said quietly, Dad says Grandpa left you a lot of money. Is that true? Yes, I replied, feeling uncomfortable answering such a direct question. And he didn't leave us anything? I looked at Trevor, who sat with a stony face, but his eyes showed satisfaction. He had put me in a situation where any answer would make me look bad in front of my grandchildren. Grandpa left his inheritance to me, I said cautiously. But that doesn't mean you won't get anything. Just not right now. When? Asked Carlton. After I die. But that could be a long time from now, Brianna pointed out. But I need to study now. Trevor leaned forward. See, Mom? The children are suffering because of this situation. They don't understand why their own grandmother doesn't want to help them get an education. I didn't say I didn't want to help. Then help, he said softly, but insistently. You can see how important it is for the children to study. Are you really going to let them give up their dreams because of pride? Leslie took Brianna by the hand. You see, dear, she said to her granddaughter, Grandma has a lot of money now, more than she can spend in her entire lifetime, but she doesn't want to share it. Why? Brianna asked, looking at me with confusion. Because she's upset with us, Trevor answered for me. She thinks we didn't take good enough care of Grandpa. Is that true, Grandma? Carlton also looked at me with a question in his eyes. I felt cornered. On the one hand, I wanted to explain the truth to the children. On the other hand, I realized that I was dragging them into an adult conflict. Children, I said slowly, your grandfather was a very wise man. He made his will as he saw fit. But you can change it, Brianna exclaimed. You can help us. I can, but should I? Of course you should. Carlton got up from the sofa. We're a family. Doesn't a family help each other? That's exactly what I'm thinking, I replied, about what it means to be a family. Trevor also stood up. Mom, look at your grandchildren. They are good kids. They deserve a better future. Are you really going to refuse to help them because of old grudges? I'm not refusing to help them, I said firmly, but helping and indulging whims are two different things. Whims? Leslie jumped up from the sofa. You call the children's desire for an education a whim? I call trying to force me to change my will through emotional blackmail a whim. No one is blackmailing you, Trevor exclaimed. We're just reminding you of your family duty. What duty? I stood up and looked him in the eye. The duty you failed to fulfill toward your father? The duty you're failing to fulfill toward me? I've always taken care of you. Taken care of me? Trevor, in the last 5 years, you've never once asked about my health just because. You've never once offered help that wasn't to your advantage. The children exchanged glances, clearly feeling uncomfortable in this adult conflict. Brianna snuggled up to her mother, and Carlton buried his face in his phone again. Maybe we should stop this argument in front of the children? Leslie suggested. No, I said firmly. Let the children hear the truth. Let them know that family is not only about rights, but also about responsibilities. I turned to my grandchildren. Carlton, Brianna, tell me honestly, when was the last time you called your grandfather just to talk? When was the last time you asked about his health? The children were silent, looking at each other. And when was the last time you came to visit me without being forced by your parents? Again, silence. See, I turned to Trevor and Leslie. You raised your children in the same tradition. For you, family is a source of benefit, not a place of mutual support and love. Trevor clenched his fists. That's not fair. The children love you. Perhaps, but love without involvement is not a family relationship. It's attachment to a source of benefits. Leslie tried to defend the children. They're still young. They don't understand. Carlton is 17, I interrupted. At that age, it's time to understand what responsibility to the family means. Brianna suddenly burst into tears. I don't understand, she sobbed. Why is everything so complicated? Why can't we just be friends? My heart ached. She was right. Children shouldn't have to suffer because of the mistakes of adults. But I knew that if I gave in now, it would only reinforce Trevor's belief that emotional pressure was the right strategy. Brianna, I said gently, sitting down next to her, we can be friends, but friendship is built on mutual respect and honesty, not on trying to get something from each other. But we can get help with our education and still be friends, right? She asked. Yes, we can, if that help is based on love, not demands. Trevor snorted. Nice words, but what does that mean in practice? In practice, it means that first you have to become a family, and then you can ask for family support. I looked at each of them. When you start taking an interest in my life, not just when you need something, then we'll talk about help. When you learn to respect my choices, then I'll be ready to support yours. Trevor realized that his strategy hadn't worked. Disappointment mixed with anger flashed in his eyes. Okay, Mom, he said coldly. You've made your position clear. Come on, kids. We're done here. As they were leaving, Brianna turned and looked at me sadly. Her gaze showed a child's confusion in the face of the complexity of the adult world. I wanted to hug her, to explain that I wasn't the enemy, that everything could change. But I knew that any show of weakness now would be misinterpreted. After they left, the house fell silent again. But this time it was the silence of determination. I realized that Trevor would not stop, that he would look for new ways to pressure me, and I needed to be ready for anything. November brought the first frosts and a sense of winter approaching. The trees stood almost bare, and through their branches I could see the bay, which now looked gray and unwelcoming. I spent more time at home, reading, sorting through Edwin's photos and letters, trying to find peace in memories of happier times. 2 weeks of complete silence passed after Trevor's last visit with his family. No one called or came by, and I almost believed that my son had finally given up trying to change my mind. But deep down, I knew it was just the calm before the next storm. On Thursday morning, as I was drinking coffee in the kitchen and reading the morning paper, the doorbell rang. The clock showed 8:30, too early for a normal visit. I went to the window and saw familiar silhouettes on the porch. Carlton and Brianna were standing at the door, but this time without their parents. My grandchildren looked uncertain, especially Carlton, who clearly didn't want to be there. Brianna was holding a small bouquet of flowers and glanced at her brother from time to time, seeking support. "Hi, Grandma," she said when I opened the door. "We wanted to talk to you." "Of course, come in," I replied, although I already guessed that this visit was not accidental. We went into the living room, where the children sat awkwardly on the sofa. Brianna handed me the flowers, white chrysanthemums, which looked rather sad at this time of year. "Thank you," I said, accepting the bouquet. "That's very kind of you." "We bought them ourselves," Brianna hastily added, "with our own money." Carlton remained silent, staring at the floor, and it was obvious that he was here against his will. His posture expressed his extreme reluctance to participate in what was happening. "Would you like some tea? Coffee?" I offered, trying to create a more friendly atmosphere. "No, thank you," Carlton replied quickly. "We won't be long." "We wanted to apologize," Brianna began, nervously twisting the edge of her jacket, "for what happened last time. We didn't want you to think badly of us." "I don't think badly of you," I assured her. "You're good kids. You just got into an unpleasant situation. Mom said we should ask you to reconsider your decision," Brianna continued, without looking up. "She said that if we explained how important education is to us, you would understand." So this was another attempt by Trevor and Leslie to use their children to achieve their goals. But this time they sent them alone, hoping that it would be harder for their grandmother to refuse her grandchildren without their parents present. "What do you think?" I asked. "Not your parents, but you yourselves?" Brianna exchanged glances with her brother, and I saw confusion in her eyes. We think, we think it would be fair if you helped us with our education," she said uncertainly. "After all, we're family." "And what does being family mean to you?" I continued to question. "Well, it's when people live together and take care of each other," Brianna replied, clearly repeating someone else's words. "Do you take care of me?" There was an awkward pause. Carlton raised his head and looked me in the eye for the first time since I had arrived. "How are we supposed to take care of you?" he asked defiantly. "You're an adult. You have money, a big house. What else is there to take care of?" His question struck me with its directness and at the same time showed how little children understand about the needs of older people. "Carlton, tell me, when was the last time you just called me? Not because your parents made you, but because you wanted to talk to your grandmother?" He frowned, clearly trying to remember such an occasion. "I don't remember. Probably a long time ago." "What about you, Brianna?" The girl blushed and lowered her eyes. "I don't remember either. Do you know what I like? What my hobbies are? What worries or pleases me?" The children exchanged glances, and it became clear that they had no idea about my personality beyond my role as a grandmother who gives gifts. "You like to read," Brianna suggested uncertainly. "What exactly do I read?" "I don't know. Books?" Carlton tried to help his sister. "Novels? Detective stories?" "Did you know that Grandpa and I went to the theater every Sunday? That we had a season ticket? Do you know that now I go there alone and it makes me very sad?" The children were silent, and in their silence lay the whole truth about our relationship. They really didn't know me as a person. They only saw me as a grandmother. "Do you know," I continued softly, "that I have a hobby? That I've been painting on porcelain for 20 years? That last year I won a prize at the city exhibition?" "Really?" Brianna asked in surprise. "Can I see it?" I led them into the room that Edwin had converted into my studio. There were easels, shelves with paints and brushes, finished works and unfinished pieces. The children looked with interest at my plates and vases, decorated with delicate floral patterns. "They're very beautiful," Brianna admitted. "I didn't know you could do that." "There's a lot you don't know about me," I replied, "because you've never been interested." "But we were little." Carlton tried to excuse himself. Kids have their own things to do. Carlton, you're 17. You're not a child anymore. At 17, it's time to learn to be an adult, to think about more than just yourself. Dad says that the most important thing for teenagers is to study and prepare for the future. He objected, that everything else is a distraction. And what, in Dad's opinion, does everything else include? Well, entertainment, friends, communicating with relatives too, I guess. His answer explained a lot about Trevor's parenting philosophy. Relatives fell into the category of distractions that should be avoided for the sake of a successful future. What about family values? I asked. Dad says that family values are when parents provide their children with a good education and a start in life, Brianna replied. And then the children are grateful and help their parents in their old age. So, for you, family is an economic transaction? I don't know. Probably, the girl replied uncertainly. We returned to the living room, where I offered the children tea after all. This time they agreed, and while I was making tea, they talked quietly among themselves. When I returned with the tray, I noticed that Carlton looked more pensive. Grandma, he said, taking a cup, do you really not want to help us with our studies? I do, I replied honestly, but on certain conditions. What conditions? On the condition that it's real family support, not a bribe. What's the difference? Brianna asked. Family support means mutuality. I help you. You participate in my life. Not just when you need something, but all the time. The children looked at each other. What does that mean in practical terms? Carlton asked cautiously. It means you call me just to talk. You take an interest in my life. You visit me without being forced by your parents. You remember my birthdays and holidays. What else? It also means that you respect my choices, even if you don't like them. You don't try to force me to do what's best for your parents. Brianna frowned. But my parents say your choice is wrong. That grandpa was sick and couldn't think straight. What do you think? I don't know, the girl admitted honestly. I hardly knew Grandpa. He was always kind of quiet, and I don't know how to talk to older people. Carlton nodded. Yes, he always sat in his chair and read. We didn't know what to talk to him about. Their admission was painful, but honest. They really didn't know their grandfather because no one had taught them how to communicate with him. And now they didn't know me for the same reason. Would you like to get to know me? I asked. You? Brianna clarified. And me too. Would you like to understand what my interests are? What I think about? What I want out of life? The children thought about it. Curiosity and habitual indifference fought in their eyes. Probably, Carlton said slowly. But that takes time. And we have school, clubs, exam preparation. There's time for what's important, I replied. It's a question of priorities. And if we spend more time with you, will you help us with our education? Brianna asked bluntly. Her question showed that the children still thought in terms of deals, despite our conversation. They were willing to invest time in communicating with me for financial gain. Brianna, if your communication with me is motivated solely by the desire to get money, then it's not a family relationship, it's work. Then what do you want? Carlton asked, a note of irritation in his voice. I want you to talk to me because I'm your grandmother, because you're interested in how I live, because you love me. But we do love you, Brianna exclaimed. Do you love me, or are you just used to my existence? The girl opened her mouth to argue, but then closed it. Apparently, my question made her think. These are complicated questions, Carlton said. We're still young. We don't understand all these grown-up things. At 17, it's time to start understanding, I replied gently but firmly. At 17, it's time to learn to be not only the recipient of care, but also its source. The children finished their tea in thoughtful silence. As they were about to leave, Brianna stopped at the door. Grandma, what if we try? Try to really communicate with you? I would be very happy, I replied sincerely. What about our parents? They want us to convince you to give us money. Parents are a different story. My relationship with them must be based on different principles. Carlton shifted impatiently from foot to foot. So, even if we communicate well with you, there still won't be any money for school? If your communication is sincere, then the support will be sincere, I replied evasively. After they left, I sat in the living room for a long time, thinking about the conversation. The children were a product of their parents' upbringing, but they still had the potential for change. The question was whether they would be able to overcome years of misguided attitudes or remain within the framework of a consumerist attitude toward family. But the main thing I realized from this visit was that Trevor had not given up on his attempts to gain access to the inheritance. He had simply changed his tactics, using the children more subtly, hoping that gradual rapprochement would bring the desired result. And that meant the fight was not over yet. December arrived with the first snow and the feeling of the approaching holidays. The whole city was getting ready for Christmas. Holiday decorations appeared in shop windows, Christmas music played in the streets, and neighbors' houses shone with colorful lights. I also took out the boxes of Christmas tree decorations that Edwin and I had collected over the years from the storage room, and for the first time in many weeks, I felt something like peace. After my grandchildren's visit, there were 2 weeks of relative quiet. Carlton called once, awkwardly asked how I was doing, and talked about preparing for his final exams. The conversation lasted only a few minutes, but there was a sincerity to it that had been missing before. Brianna sent a postcard with a picture of a winter landscape and a short note about how she felt about me. These small gestures warmed my heart and gave me hope that I could still repair my relationship with my grandchildren, but I knew that the calm was temporary. Trevor was too stubborn and too greedy to simply accept the situation, especially now that the holidays were approaching and the question of family gifts was becoming particularly relevant. On Saturday, December 12th, as I was decorating the Christmas tree in the living room, there was a sharp ring at the door. A blizzard was raging outside the window, and I was surprised that someone had decided to leave the house in such weather. But when I opened the door, I saw Trevor in a heavy winter coat, with snow on his shoulders and a determined look on his face. "I need to talk to you," he said without greeting me, entering the house and brushing the snow off his clothes. "In this weather?" I asked in surprise. "What could be so important?" Something I should have said a long time ago. We went into the living room, where the half-decorated Christmas tree was a reminder of the interrupted preparations for the holiday. Trevor glanced around the room, lingering on the boxes of toys and the Christmas wreaths I had hung on the walls. "Getting ready for Christmas?" he asked with a hint of irony in his voice. "Yes, why are you surprised?" "I'm surprised that you plan to celebrate alone." "Not necessarily alone. Maybe I'll invite the neighbors or friends from the theater club." Trevor sat down in Edwin's chair, as he always did without asking. But this time there was something new in his posture, the cold determination of a man who had made a final decision. "Mom, I'm tired of these games," he said bluntly. "I'm tired of pretending that we can have a normal relationship." "I'm not playing games, Trevor, and I'm not pretending." "Yes, you are. You pretend that you're willing to forgive and forget if we change. But in reality, you've already made up your mind, haven't you?" I looked at him more closely. His voice sounded tired, but not from fighting over the inheritance, but from having to maintain the appearance of a family relationship. "What do you mean?" "I mean you never intended to share the inheritance. You never planned to change the will. All this talk about family values and mutual respect is just a way to make us dance to your tune." "That's not true." "It is, Mom. And you know what? I'm tired of this charade. tired of pretending that I care about your opinion of what kind of son I should be." Trevor stood up and walked to the window, where snow swirled outside. His silhouette against the white whirlwind looked grim and determined. "I spent 2 months trying to convince you to do the sensible thing," he continued without turning around. "I brought in experts, showed you different options, got the kids involved. And what was the result? You won't even consider a compromise." "A compromise?" I felt anger rising in my chest. "Trevor, your idea of a compromise is when I do what you want and say thank you for it. And your idea of fairness is to deprive your only son of his inheritance because of childhood grievances." "Childhood grievances?" I got up from my chair and walked over to him. "You call it a childhood grievance that you didn't visit your dying father? That you plan to send me to a nursing home without asking my opinion? I plan to provide you with a secure old age. You plan to get rid of a burdensome mother while gaining access to the family fortune." Trevor turned sharply toward me. There was no longer any attempt to persuade or beg in his eyes, only the cold fury of a man who had finally dropped his mask. "You know what, Mom? Maybe you're right. Maybe I am selfish. Maybe I wasn't the perfect son. But you know what I've realized these past 2 months?" "What?" "That I don't care. I don't care about your opinion, your feelings, your pride. All I care about is the money you're hiding from the family." His candor was shocking and liberating at the same time. He had finally told the truth and stopped hiding behind pretty words about caring for the family. "At least now you're being honest," I said. "Yes, honest. And you know what else? The kids understand what's going on too. After talking to you, Carlton told me he doesn't want to be part of this family drama anymore, and Brianna said she'll earn her own money for conservatory. And that's bad? It shows that your philosophy of family values has destroyed my family," he exploded. "The children are distancing themselves from their parents because you've convinced them that we're selfish and heartless." "I didn't convince them of anything. I just showed them the difference between love and consumerism." "Great." Trevor clapped his hands with a sarcastic smile. "Congratulations. You've achieved your goal. Now you have moral superiority and $13 million. Enjoy." He headed for the exit, but stopped at the door and turned to me. "You know what's funny?" he added. "I've spent my whole life thinking I loved you, that behind all our conflicts there was real affection. But now I realize I was just used to you, like a piece of furniture." "Trevor, no, let me finish. You wanted honesty? Here you go. I don't love you, Mom. Maybe I never did. You were just a function in my life, a source of support, unconditional approval, periodic financial assistance." His words cut deep, but I forced myself to listen to him until he was done. "I didn't love Dad either. He was a boring old man who read books and grew roses. I wasn't interested in talking to him or listening to his lectures about life." "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I'm tired of pretending," he shouted. "Tired of pretending to be a loving son when inside I feel nothing but irritation and boredom." Trevor moved closer to me, and I saw something frightening in his face. "Do you know how I felt when I found out about the will? Not pain, not resentment. Relief. Finally, I could stop pretending to be part of a happy family." "If that's the case, why did you spend 2 months trying to convince me?" "Out of greed. Pure, simple greed. $13 million is worth playing the model son for a while." His cynicism was absolute, and there was a terrifying honesty in it. I realized that I was looking at a man who had finally shown his true colors. "But now the game is over," he continued. "I'm not going to pretend anymore. I'm not going to feign remorse. I'm not going to bring the children to see you. I'm not going to play the role of the caring son." And what next? Nothing. We just stopped being a family. Officially. Trevor took an envelope out of his pocket and placed it on the coffee table. These are the documents renouncing my inheritance. I am relinquishing all claims to what Dad left behind. Let it be yours alone. Why? To be free, free from obligations, from the need to maintain relationships, from guilt. He put on his coat and headed for the door. Trevor, wait, I called after him. What? What about the children, Carlton and Brianna? The children are old enough to decide for themselves whether they want to maintain a relationship with their grandmother. I won't force them. That's it? We'll never see each other again? Trevor stopped at the door and looked at me one last time. Why would we? We have nothing left to say to each other. The door closed behind him with a soft click, leaving me alone in the living room with a half-decorated Christmas tree and an envelope on the table. Outside, the blizzard continued to rage, but a strange silence reigned in the house, not tense, as before, but peaceful. I picked up the envelope and opened it. The documents were drawn up correctly, with seals and signatures. Trevor was indeed renouncing all claims to Edwin's inheritance. At first, I felt devastated. After all, he was my son, the only child I had given birth to and raised. But gradually, the emptiness gave way to relief. The years of pretense were over. I no longer had to hope for the impossible, to wait for changes that would never happen. I went back to decorating the Christmas tree, hanging ornaments that remembered many family holidays. Each one had its own story. This one we bought in our first year of marriage. This one was a gift from little Trevor, made with his own hands in kindergarten. This one Edwin brought back from a business trip. When the tree was ready, I turned on the lights and sat down in an armchair, admiring their soft glow. The house was warm and cozy. Snow was swirling outside the window, and somewhere in the far room, an old clock was ticking. An hour later, the phone rang. It was Brianna. "Grandma," she said quietly, "Dad told me that you two have had a final falling out." "Yes, Brianna, but it doesn't concern you and Carlton. He said that we have to decide for ourselves whether we want to maintain a relationship with you." "And what have you decided?" "I want to visit you for Christmas. Is that okay?" "Of course, dear. I'd be very happy to have you." "Carlton wants to come too." Just us, without our parents. After talking to my granddaughter, I sat in my chair for a long time, looking at the Christmas tree. The house no longer seemed too big or too quiet. It was my home, a place where I could live as I saw fit, welcome those I wanted to see, and keep out those who only brought me pain. Edwin was right. His will not only provided me with financial independence, but also gave me the opportunity to free myself from toxic relationships. Sometimes the greatest love is not shown by enduring and forgiving, but by setting boundaries and protecting one's own dignity. At 73, I finally became truly free, and it was the best Christmas present I could have imagined.